The driver had arrived. My daughter was just putting the cat away because he has a tendency to jump on the table. My son, who's 13, shouted, "Make sure you hide the cat away from the Chinese guy." I was collecting the delivery at the time and the driver's face dropped.
A very interesting video recently appeared in my Instagram feed from an account called Asians with Attitudes. And the video is about racism against Chinese people here in the UK. And it provided some interesting food for thought, which I wanted to share with you. So let's watch the video together and then I'm going to break it down.
Am I wrong for punishing my son after he said something racist? About a week ago, we ordered Chinese food for delivery. Whilst the driver had arrived, my daughter was just putting the cat away because he has a tendency to jump on the table. My son, who's 13, shouted, "Make sure you hide the cat away from the Chinese guy." I was collecting the delivery at the time and the driver's face dropped. He was obviously upset. I quickly apologised and took the food. I told my son that racist jokes were completely unacceptable and he was completely wrong for doing that. He wouldn't accept that he was wrong and said it was just a joke. So later that night, I forced him to write a sincere apology to the delivery driver, whose name is on the receipt. I also told him to write a one-page paper on why racism was perpetuated by racist jokes and stereotypes. The next day we went down to the restaurant and I made him apologise and show his note, and the writing is done. The delivery driver was very appreciative of the apology and told my son about a few comments and attacks he'd even had at the hands of racism. However, late that night, myself and my husband got in an argument. He's saying that I was too hard on my son and that the punishment didn't fit the crime. He said that I embarrassed my son over a joke, and it wasn't that big a deal.
So let me just start by addressing the harmful stereotype that this boy shared, that the Chinese eat cats.
Make sure you hide the cat away from the Chinese guy.
Because we don't. Nobody eats cat. That's what I learned from the Chinese comedian Zhao Ying Summers.
Remember Trump? The debate is like the immigrants, they came to our country to eat the dogs and cats. I was so offended. I'm like, oh my God, that's awful. I would never eat a cat. Utopia. Because we all know cat meat is super sour. I'm not gonna eat a cat.
It's not like dog, which apparently is delicious. Everybody knows that cat meat is sour.
The driver's face dropped. He was obviously upset. I quickly apologised and took the food. I told my son that racist jokes were completely unacceptable and he was completely wrong for doing that. He wouldn't accept that he was wrong and said it was just a joke.
So the boy says it was just a joke, i.e. there was no harm intended, it was just a laugh. And I get that because being a Gen Xer, I was born in 1972, and when I was growing up, we all took the piss out of each other. Nobody was immune, and whatever your identity, whatever made you different, that's what everybody would pick on, whether it was your race or your sexuality or your weight or the fact that you had ginger hair, or you might have been a bit thick, or maybe you were a nerd. Whatever it was, kids would hone in on that aspect of your persona and terrorize you for it. And we all had to suffer this. So I imagine the boy's dad, who would be a Gen Xer, was clearly brought up this way. But there's a time and place for jokes, isn't there? Because it's about teaching your child context and when is the appropriate time to share these kind of jokes, and it requires familiarity. So it's fine to poke fun at your best friends because they know that you don't mean any harm, that you're not really hating on them, and you can attack them back in a friendly manner. But it's not something that you do to strangers that who you've never met before. And so I think that is the lesson here that the boy needs to learn. It was totally inappropriate in this context. Among friends in our school days, the stuff we would say to each other was so horrendous. Today you'd probably get locked up for some of the jokes that we shared, the personal attacks that we aimed at one another. But yeah, we knew it was meaningless and nobody took it seriously. But it's so different when it's people you don't know. and it can be painful and humiliating. That was my experience. As a first generation immigrant, I was like one of the only Chinese kids in my town when I moved to the UK. And I'm sorry if you've heard this story before, because I've told it many times on my social media. But yeah, I used to get bullied, like racially abused by strangers all the time. Kids in school, in the hallway that I didn't know, and strangers, like adults. It was worse when it was done by adults. Sometimes I'd be boarding a packed train and a man would take the piss out of me. He'd be like, "Oh, Ching Chong Chinaman," or something like that, something ridiculous, and then the whole group would laugh. And I was only like 8 or 9, and it was horrible. Every time that happened, it made me cry inside. I'd have a painful lump in my throat that would last for hours because it was so humiliating. Yeah, that's what life was like for us first generation immigrants in 80s small town UK. It got a lot better when I moved to London. There was no more bullying, but when I lived in Bedford, I was bullied every single day by kids I didn't know in the hallways at school, and much worse when it was by adults, drunken adults on the street. So while the joke might seem really trivial at the time, from the point of view of the person telling it, like this cat joke, for the person at the other end of the joke, if it's just the latest in a daily, endless onslaught of humiliation, it hits really differently and it really crushes your soul. I'd like to think that the man in the video, the delivery driver, doesn't get this daily and it's only infrequent. I really hope so, because from my perspective, the UK has improved so much since that time. In fact, in the last 30 years, I don't think I've had any racial mockery at all. But in the 80s, in small town UK, it was daily. And although I said everybody got picked on for this, that or the other, that was among friends, not strangers. And sometimes it was actually really hostile. Sometimes they told me to F off back to China with actual hate, and that was scary whenever that happened. Sometimes that was, someone would yell that to me from across the street. I was walking to school. And I know some of you listening to this will think, damn, white people are evil. But I honestly harbor no ill feelings towards white people as a whole because of what I went through. Because to do that would be racism in itself. Because those people were, even though it was daily, it was less than 1% of the population. Because my school had 1,200 students and it was just a handful of them who would do this to me every day. So there's, that percentage, 1% perhaps, of humanity is shitty. And it doesn't matter what color they are. There are just arsey people walking among all the good people out there, but they don't represent the entire population. And I didn't tell my parents about any of this at the time. They had no idea I was being racially harassed every single day, because I didn't want them to feel sorry for me or worry about me. I was in a really good school and they were proud that I got in, and I was doing very well academically. So I didn't want to rain on their parade. But there was one day where it was really bad and I just broke down in front of my mom, and it all just came pouring out because I've been holding in for so long. And she taught me a really good trick. She said, if anybody makes fun of you and pulls eyes at you and does all this kind of stuff, do this back to them. And I laughed my head off when she showed me this. We were just like, me and my mom did this to each other for like 10 minutes, like, and that was a game changer, that was, because the next time someone did that to me at school, I remembered what my mom showed me, and I had the whole class in stitches, and I won, basically, because that's what teasing is about, isn't it? Is like getting laughter out of people. And so I had the last laugh and it was better. So that's a trick to teach your kids if you have kids that are being bullied in this way. They need to have some sort of revenge attack that is funnier and crueler. But the ironic thing is, I don't even have slanty eyes. I'm Chinese, and I looked really Chinese in those days when I had my mushroom haircut, my rice bowl haircut. But I've always had big round eyes, not the stereotypical slanty ones, because there's two types of Chinese eyes. In Family Guy, Peter Griffin said that there's two types of Asians. There's the ones with the sleepy eyes and the ones with the evil eyes. Yeah, it's two eye types. I think in Cantonese we call them Dan Yan Pei and Sung Yan Pei. I can't remember which is which. But I think the slanty eyes are gorgeous. I'm so envious of people who have those beautiful eyes. But it's just sad that stupid people have an issue with it. I think the difference is actually if you're more northern Chinese, you tend to have the narrower eyes. And if you're more southern, you have the more like the sleepy, heavy eyelids. Because there's so many different facial types in China. It's a massive country, the size of Europe. And originally, there were 57 ethnicities. So we're so diverse, but people think of that one stereotypical, more like northerly kind of, I don't even know if it's northerly, but certainly it's like the colder parts tend to have the more like Siberian-y sort of features. Just like with wolves. The wolves in those cold parts of the world have Chinese eyes, you know, the stereotypical Chinese eyes, because it's to deal with the elements. Meanwhile, in the hotter parts, like me, I'm from Hong Kong, and Guangdong, the southern part of China, where we have a lot of sunshine, then we have the heavier eyelids typically, which is more similar to black people's eyes.
So later that night, I forced him to write a sincere apology to the delivery driver, whose name is on the receipt. I also told him to write a one-page paper on why racism was perpetuated by racist jokes and stereotypes. The next day we went down to the restaurant and I made him apologise and show his note, and the writing is done.
So what do you think about this one-page note? Was it a proportionate, reasonable punishment for what he did? I kind of think it was, because an ordinary apology, I'm sorry, it's just so insincere, isn't it? It doesn't mean anything, because he probably doesn't actually believe it. He doesn't feel sorry when he's uttering those two kind of meaningless words. So having to do the research and learning to write this one-page note has taught him a lesson to remember. So I think she was actually a very good mom for that. And this is like, that's how we did it back in the day. Old school punishments were designed to teach you a lesson. And I'm sure the driver was very touched to receive it, because it's the fact that the mother went out of her way to make the child write this note and teach him a lesson. It shows that she cared. And kids are kids, right? And I'm sure he knew that. Like, he's just been a stupid kid. but it's the parents' job to teach your kids. So if you've got racist kids, it's because you're most likely racist. So the fact that she made the child write this note and bring it in and apologize, it was a very sincere acknowledgement on the mother's behalf that she failed in her duty. And it's an act of kindness which I think erases the damage done and was actually very meaningful. What do you think? Do you agree with me? Or do you think it was stupid?
The delivery driver was very appreciative of the apology and told my son about a few comments and attacks he'd even had at the hands of racism. However, late that night, myself and my husband got in an argument. He's saying that I was too hard on my son and that the punishment didn't fit the crime. He said that I embarrassed my son over a joke, and it wasn't that big a deal.
So, while I do agree with the mother's actions, I can also see her husband's point that, yeah, she totally embarrassed her son, and I think he deserved it. Kids need to feel the humiliation that they cause somebody else with their naughty behavior. So, although I agree with her punishment, I can also see the dad's point that it wasn't a big deal and it was just a joke. But as I said earlier in this video, it was a big deal. It would have been a big deal to the person at the other end of the joke because he's a stranger. But as far as sharing racist jokes in general, I will never stop laughing at racist jokes myself. Whether it's about race or gender or sexuality or age or weight or what have you, jokes are offensive and that's what makes them funny. Comedy is about offense, right? People pay good money to go to stand-up comedy shows to laugh at offensive jokes. The more offensive, the funnier, right? Anybody remember Eddie Murphy Raw or Andrew Dice Clay and Richard Pryor? More recently, Ricky Gervais and Dave Chappelle. I love all these comedians, and it's the fact that they made fun of everybody and it was no holds barred. That's what made their comedy so special. And there's a time and a place for it. That's what I'm trying to say. So these types of jokes are fine among friends where you all know where each other stands. And I don't care if it's racist or transphobic or homophobic or ageist or whatever. You know that among friends it's not hate, but it's not appropriate among strangers. So this is all. It's all about. In the case of this video, it was about teaching her child context and understanding the appropriate time and place to be racist. Yeah, sometimes it's okay, and sometimes it's really funny. I am not offended by racism if it's in the context of a joke. But today, especially among Gen Z, a lot of people have a very dogmatic kind of view of these kind of things, that all racism is bad and all isms are bad. But it's, I think, maybe to do with how there are such high levels of autism in our society now that you've got to have hard and fast rules, what is good and what is bad. And there's less room for nuance and less consideration for the context in which sometimes something that might be totally inappropriate in one context is fine in another context. And for me, racism is one of those things, and all the other isms in comedy and among friends is cool. And we all, if you're going to be honest, we're all guilty of all the isms privately. Don't try and pretend that you're not, that you're some kind of like a holy saint who never stereotypes anybody. But what are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments if you agreed or disagreed with anything I said here. And thank you so much for all of your comments. I appreciate every one of them. I try my best to read every single comment I get. There are some that I miss because YouTube hides them for me for some reason. I don't know why. I can't figure it out. But all the ones that I can see, I read, and I really value your engagement. And thank you for all the likes and shares. And if you're not already subscribed to my channel, please do so. And please hit that notification button. And if you enjoyed this video, do give this one a watch too. Thank you so much. Have a great day.